All right, so here we go, part 2, right? Drum shells is not rocket science, okay? Drum shells have been made for centuries, and if mechanical techniques have made making drum shells easier, it hasn't necessarily made them better sounding. No. And I showed you, where's that mallet? Real quick, and watch the other video. I don't want to spend a lot of time doing this, but that sound of that shell, that tone of that shell, bum bum, once you clamp it with just a thumb and a forefinger, I've killed it. When you start putting lugs all over this and compress a couple of membranes on that cylinder, no, that basically you have a density sound chamber of some kind that will allow the sound waves from the heads to be excited, lesser, longer, louder. It's the density of the shell. That's the most important thing. Now, I'm going to prove it. People talk about, because I believe the sound of a drum is the heads. 90%, 95, 99% of the sound of a drum is the heads. And people think that I'm crazy for saying such a thing. Well, I've walked into drum shops all over the place where I've lived, different places around the country, or other places I visited, and I'll go to the music stores, and just because I'm constantly looking for something that proves me wrong. I really am. I'm literally, my life would be a lot easier to not bring this up and have people call me a lunatic and crazy and liar and all this other kind of stuff, and I don't know what I'm talking about. Well, like I said, for 25 plus years, been making my own drums, and so I'll go into shops, right? And I'll tap on all the drums. Sometimes there could be dozens of sets in there, sometimes not as many. Doesn't matter what shop I go into, I tap all the drums. Some of the heads could be tensioned better. The drums sound kind of dead. They don't do the best for every drum set that's on the floor for whatever reason. But I'll go around tapping all the drums, and I'll say they all sound like drums. A drum is a drum. I don't hear anything that sounds dramatically different to me. One time, and I was driving in Indiana, and I saw drums in the wind, drums in the wind off to the side off the highway, and I thought, cool. So I got off the highway and went into drums in the wind, and looked around. Big music store, huge music store. Went to the drum section, and they have a room, a soundproof room, and you go in there, and all the drum sets were all lined up. Dum 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 dum. I just tapped on all the drums, all the toms, all the first toms facing me as I walked by each kit. One drum set, one drum sounded different to me. How do I mean by different? I don't know, a little sweeter, some people say warmer, some people say, I don't know. It sounded nicer. It just sounded nicer to me. You know what it was? IOT drums with maple hoops. I thought, oh, is that the difference? I looked around, shells, maple shell, just like all the other kits in there, high-end shells. And not all the kits were all maple shells. Some were birch, some were who knows what they were. They all sounded basically the same to me. But this kit was different. This IOT kit was different because of those, I believe, because of those maple hoops. And it allowed the heads to just sound a little more natural, a little more pleasing. When you take a metal hoop and you put it on the metal hoop of a drum head, you are now canceling out some frequencies. That's what I believe. That's what my experience has been, because I said, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and have maple hoops for my drums someday. And some years ago, I got them for my big set. Jody up at Stellar had him make a full set of hoops for my big set. Drums sing like birds. I'm going to show you in a second. All right, so to me, and here's what I did. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different toms here. And you're going to see they're all wrapped in paper because I don't want anybody to see them and say, oh, those are junk drums, man. They're not going to sound good. I only want you to hear them. I don't want you to see them. I'll take the paper off and then I'll hit them all again later. But right now I just want you to hear the drums. I used a drum dial to tune them up. Got them all to the relative same pitch. Now, because I'm not in a studio here, I'm just in the room where my drums, this particular drum set, my plywood drums are set up. You might hear, vibrations. You might hear things. You might hear the paper. I tap the drums beforehand, and you can hear a little vibration from the paper itself. Just listen to the sound of the drum not the extraneous sounds that you might hear, because when I strike the drum, I turn the snares off because I didn't want those to vibrate on the kit. All right, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to strike these drums. Now, like I said, same relative pitch on all the drums. I'm not going to tell you who makes them. I will tell you when they're mine. All right, here's another thing. They say, yeah, we would never put wrap on our drums. Why not? That's all a shell is a bunch of layers of wood wrapped. So you think putting a piece of plastic on the outside of the shell, the sound waves have to get through the shell out to that plastic to make any difference. Okay, the head's not touching it. Not if you have any kind of an outside bearing edge. The head's not really touching it. If it is, it's touching a whole bunch of layers of wood first before it gets to the plastic. If it made that much difference, why do the top drummers in the world, some of the top drummers in the world that can play whatever they want, why do they play drums with plastic wrap on them? Why would they do that if it makes such a difference in the sound? It makes the sound worse. Why bother? Well, these are my drums, all right? This is from my big set. This is a 5x10 tom from my big set with Stellar's maple hoops. And like I said, I'm using attack heads, all right? Single ply clear. You might say, but that's not my preferred sound. That's not the point. I just want you to see that all these drums are basically going to sound the same. And if you put them in a big drum set with cymbals and a band, you're never going to hear the difference. So the hype is hype. All right, but these are attack clear, single ply heads, top and bottom. All right, so here it is. All these toms, except for one, I think, they all have different thicknesses on the shells, different materials, different lug configuration and whatnot. They're different. Every drum in this thing is different in some way, shape, or form, right? So that's what I was going to say. See this on the outside, the finish? It's tooled leather. This particular set, I decided to do something different, and I used tool leather. I think it looks really cool. But anyway, it's just tooled leather glued onto the outside. See if you think it makes a big difference in the sound of the drum. That's a maple shell, a Keller maple shell. This is from the set that's set up here. These are my plywood drums. Nothing about these drums. These are experimental drums, and I love them. Nothing about these drums follows any rules of any kind in the drum industry. They follow my rules, but they don't follow the typical rules you see out there. The shells are like 9/16 to 5/8 thick. They're not perfectly round because I don't have a lathe to make them perfectly round. I did more sanding in 2 days than, oh man. But anyway, I got them round enough, right? They look round, but they're like 9/16, 5/8 of an inch thick. Well, if they're not round, that means the bearing edges are not perfect. I had to use a Dremel to get those bearing edges where I wanted them so the heads could seat correctly where and how I wanted them to, all right? There's no lugs on the shell. This is a single tuning idea, right? So it's just a threaded rod going through a little decorative dowel here. And you've got a T-nut on the bottom hoop. These are just plywood hoops. That's all. Just plywood. They tune up just fine. And I just tension. I got a driver nut, and it's affixed to a drum key. And when I tension one head, both heads tighten at the same time. And tell me if you think that I think they sound fantastic for what they are. Come on. Don't sound a lot different than what I just hit in the maple shell. Okay, so that was 6x10. Here's another 6x10. Here's a 7x10. Here's an 8x10. I hear a slight, even with the drum dial, I hear a slight soft spot at one of the lugs on that. But you get the idea of the relative pitch, right? Volume of the drum and everything. Here's this is 8x12. This is 8 inch as well. You can hear the paper rattling on that. Same basic pitch though. Same sound. If you hear anything different to this point, nuances. This is 9 by 10. And last, 9 by 10. They all sound like drums. They all sound good to me. There are slight differences in tonal characteristics that I can hear. If you say you can hear them on the microphones, then right away that dispels anything about microphones and YouTube compression, right? Because you say, well, I can hear the difference between that one and that one. You might hear some volume difference. I'm using a big stick. I'm using a maple stick, wood tip, street stick. I use it for practice, and I just wanted to get the maximum thump. I wouldn't use these to play drums. My goodness, I destroy the heads and the cymbals in a half an hour. But I just wanted to use this to get the maximum punch out of the drum, right? Now, the differences that you hear, that you just heard, do you think you'd hear those differences when you're playing the entire drum set with cymbals in a band? No, you wouldn't. Not if you're honest. You won't. Now what I'll do is I'll start taking the paper off. We'll hit the drums all again. I'll let you know what they are, okay? First one. It's a 9 by 10, and it's a Mapex. M series, birch. Mapex birch. Next, Yamaha Rydeen student level drum. Okay? Yamaha Rydeen student level drum, 9 by 10. The shell looks like just mahogany, Luan mahogany. Next, 8 by 10. Did you hear any major volume differences? Did you hear any major tonal differences just because some drums are deeper than the others? No, I don't. I'm sitting right here. This is Pearl, the most popular drum on the planet. Pearl Export, ECX series. This is maple, all maple. Next up, Pacific Drums and Percussion, PDP, double drive, poplar shell, 8 by 10. Next up, D-drum. DR2, basswood shells. This is the kicker. I love this. $10 on eBay. I don't know what it is. I don't know who makes it. It looks like a basswood shell, thinner shell than some of the others. 4 tuning lugs. That's it. 4 lugs to tune with. A little more difficult to tune this drum. It basically just clips on to whatever it originally went on. $10 on eBay, right? Seriously? And you're going to tell me that the shell makes a huge difference? No, it's a sound chamber. The heads make the sound of the drum. I'm holding it so it can vibrate freely. The heads can excite each other. That's a good sounding drum. Seriously? You may not like the pitch. You may not like that much sustain. Maybe you like, twin ply heads, thuddier sound. I'm just saying drum to drum. All right, so 6 by 10. Here's mine again. And my maple. You know why I think this drum is louder? It's not because the sound chamber is different. It's the narrowest drum. It's a 5 by 10. This is part of my double set, which is 4 by 8, 5 by 10, 6 by 12, 7 by 14, etc. Half toms, all right? I started doing this back in the 90s, and I like the feel the best. I like the sound the best. Sounds more musical. I like being able to play on the half toms. And some guys don't. They think they want deeper drums. Want drums to look like drums. Yeah, okay. But why is this drum? It's a maple shell, and it's a maple shell not any different than that ECX. It's a maple shell not any different than the birch shell from Mapex. All these shells. why is this drum so loud? I believe it's because of the maple hoops. And it just allows the head to freely speak out more so than if it had metal hoops on it. Otherwise, there's no different. I did change some of the bearing edges. On some of these toms had bearing edges that were, you know, the typical just total 45 inside. They didn't, and I wanted the drums to sound their best. Some of these drums are basically entry-level drums, right? And I wanted the drums to sound their best, so I redid the bearing edges on some. Some of the bearing edges were fine, but I wanted the heads to seat best so that the drums could sound best. And obviously some, like this one, I changed the bearing edge. I mean, it was just ridiculous. But once I changed the bearing edges on these, here are these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 drums. Could you tell any major differences? Major differences that some shell design is supposed to. Now somebody says, well, you don't have Bubinga in there, and you don't have this shell configuration and that. Well, if this doesn't prove that a drum is a drum, you won't be convinced no matter what. Because I'm not going to go out and spend the money, hundreds of dollars, on a Bubinga tom, and I know it won't sound any different than these. Maybe the nuance will be a little brighter because Bubinga's harder. You know, maybe a little more sustained because the sound waves are trapped for a longer period of time inside the cylinder. But no, I'm not going to go out and spend that kind of money. And if somebody said, what are you going to do with all these? Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do the bearing edge thing on these naked shells, right? And I'm going to do this gig on them to make that easy. And the others I'll turn into, I don't know, popcorn snare drums, or maybe I'll have a little tiny jazz set of all 10-inch toms. I don't know. But anyway, from my point of view, the sound of the drum is the drum heads. Nothing about this drum, nothing about this drum is right. It's not perfectly round. The bearing edges are nowhere near perfect. Why do they sound so nice? Because the heads are seated correctly. And the sound of a drum is the heads. So like I said, if you go watch that Ford video, you've got this video, you've got Kevin Fortunato's video, you might hear some nuances here. I'm not saying you don't. But if I sold to you, you know, turn off the visual, just listen. Could you tell the difference between what you were hearing here and something else? Could you tell the difference between the birch and the maple and the poplar and the basswood and the Luan mahogany and plywood? You might be able to tell some small differences. When you're playing a full drum set, my friend, spend your time looking at cosmetics, hardware, how the drums are mounted. Spend your time looking at that when you buy drums. You don't need to spend a boatload of money on a set of drums to have them sound good. You just don't. So I appreciate you watching this. Again, honest comments are welcome. I'm not going to disable comments, which could easily be done. But look, it's not the microphones. It's not YouTube compression. If you can tell the difference between my voice and somebody else's voice sitting in the room here, it's going to be the same with these drums. These are 10-inch drums, different depths, different shells, different bearing edges. They all sound basically the same. A drum is a drum. And what makes the sound of a drum is the drum head. Again, I'm passionate about this, not just because of what I think the observation is, common sense and logic what tells me. It's physics. It's just the physics of what we're talking about. Two membranes, cylinder. What happens to the sound waves inside the cylinder when you strike the membranes? What happens on the inside? Everybody knows they've been trying to make mylar heads in some fashion that mimic the sound of calf heads. Nobody's really done it yet. They come close. They're muting the head with different types of, you know, head configuration. So wait a minute. Some of the way the shells were made back then, you might have had steam bent solid shells. You might have had different types of ply shells, which generally could be a layer of maple inside and out, or just outside for looks. But even back then, everything had wraps on it, you know, mother of pearl and all that kind of stuff. But the heads, why did the drums sound a little bit different? because of the calf skin heads. The sound of a drum is the heads, not the drum shell. Yes, it vibrates as a unit. When you can mount it, freely mount it, it vibrates as a unit. But the lion's share of what a drum sounds like is the drum heads, friends, not the drum shells. The hype is that's just what it is. You know, if somebody really made a drum shell that was so superior that it gave the drum such a superior sound, why wouldn't pros out there, hundreds and hundreds of well-known and lesser-known drummers who could easily afford any drum they want, why wouldn't they all gravitate to the company who makes the best drum shells? Common sense tells me nobody makes any better drum shells one way or the other than anybody else. And it's just hype. It's ultra hype. It's not just a shame, it's a sham. So anyway, that's it. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching.